All right. So we are so pleased to welcome a panel of experts who are members of the Vision for American Science and Technology, VAST task force, who are going to share their policy ideas for a globally competitive science and technology enterprise for the United States. Sudip Parikh, as most of you already know, is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, and the executive publisher of science journals. And he has so kindly agreed to moderate this panel discussion and chair. He's also the chair of the task force. So thank you, Sudip. The panelists for these discussions are Franz Cordova, president of the Science Philanthropy Alliance and the 14th director of the National Science Foundation, Monica Duss, associate professor in the Department of Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology in the University of Michigan, and Marcia McNutt, the president of the National Academy of Sciences. I'll also be participating today as a panelist to bring in an industry perspective. But with that, I'm going to pass it up to Sudip to begin the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Dario. And it's great to see so many of you colleagues and friends here. This is a really important moment in history. And, I was so glad to catch the tail end of Panch's talk just now, because it's a great preamble to the kind of work that VAST is doing, the Vision for American Science and Technology. This started really at your last board meeting, at the last board meeting of the NSB, because a side conversation happened where we talked about the fact that so much has changed in our scientific ecosystem over the last 80 years. And we are not reflecting that in the policy discussions here in Washington. We're not reflecting that in terms of what we're trying to do to compete globally and to inspire the awe that is required of science. And so we, at that meeting, we realized that it wasn't going to come from on high. This vision of what can science and technology do for the country, what can it do for the world, isn't going to come from on high. In fact, it's going to have to come from the community itself. And so we pulled together a remarkable task force. Again, since September of this year, we pulled together 70 people. It's a remarkable cross-section of America. It is university presidents, it is CEOs and leaders in business, it is folks in finance, it is folks who are formerly in the government, and it is incredible scientists. It is across every career stage, from retired scientists emeritus all the way to graduate students. It is covering geographically every part of the nation. It is 70 people, and it is, I have to tell you, it's the most remarkable thing I've ever been a part of. What I want to just give you is that in order to accomplish our goal, which we have two deliverables that we want to provide. One is an actual vision for American science and technology, to be inspirational and aspirational, to build on the foundations of what's been built across this country for the last 80 years. And that is it is something that is, everywhere I go in the country, it's needed. When I've never had the experience of recruiting to join a task force where every person said yes. Every person. And that's my job full time, is to ask people to do things for free. And it's remarkable. They joined it immediately, and they got it immediately. And what it's led to is a remarkable process that is asynchronous because everyone's busy. It is something that is voluntary, that we do late at night and early in the morning. It is requiring turnaround times that are just extraordinary, and they're all doing it. And we've also had participation and input from 16 leaders in government, including Panch, including the NIH director, including chief scientists across the federal government. We've had input from postdoc association and every discipline you can think of. And what that's led to at this point is a small set of recommendations that we think are ready for a transition team that are very tactical, with the promise of a release of the full vision and inspiring and aspirational document in February. And so we are halfway through that process, a remarkable timeline, and the three people that you see on screen are part of making that happen. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to somebody who needs no introduction to you all, Franz Cordova, to really talk about the background and what's changed over time and what's led up to the work of the task force. Franz?
Great. Thanks very much. I assume you can hear me?
We can.
Okay, great, great. Well, hello, NSV, and welcome to the new members. How exciting. And hello, NSF and its amazing staff. It's good to be back in a sense. And I too caught the end of Pancha's very inspired remarks and how relevant they are. So NSF has always been on the right track with the intention of VAST is to get everybody on that track. So my role here this morning is to give a background to the VAST efforts starting 75 years ago and illustrate how different is the climate for science today, setting the stage for the recommendations that Marcia and Monica will present. So as we all know, science, the endless frontier with its post-World War II aspirations to involve scientists in shaping the future of our country, its underscoring of the importance of basic research and its emphasis on attracting more young people into science planted very deep roots in our nation's science psyche. It was followed by vigorous science institution building, including, of course, the founding of NSF. And we can think of that document as a social contract between science and society of that era. It turned out to be a contract that propelled our country into a position of enviable leadership. Well, today's frontier has been upended with new players, and you heard a lot about that from Panch just a few minutes ago. New tools that offer both promise and threat to our social fabric, often engendering distrust and confusion and a fierce competition for global leadership. A recent analysis by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute says that, quote, China's global lead extends to 37 out of 44 technologies that they're tracking, covering a range of crucial fields spanning defense, space, robotics, energy, the environment, biotechnology, AI, advanced materials, and key quantum technology areas. So things have changed a lot. How do we maintain our global leadership? How do we continue to promote economic growth, ensure security, and improve lives here in our country? It's this setting, a changed world, that the VAST initiative addresses. And it's a venture to create a new social contract, one that recognizes that the world that science finds itself in has changed profoundly. That doesn't diminish our desire to be globally competitive and to be responsive to our nation's needs at the same time. It means that we need to be smart in our awareness, incisive in our proposed solutions, and work together. So I'll mention a few of the most significant changes that the VAST initiative has considered, and then Marcia and Monica will talk about new proposals that VAST champions, proposals responsive to our new era. So first, there are new players on the science scene: university, industry, philanthropy, in addition to the government that the Bush document promoted, and all are prominent sectors on today's research ecosystem. Since leaving NSF, I've been in the science philanthropy world. Our recent indicators report, which draws on the data and the people from NCSES, thank you, reveals that philanthropy's support for basic research at university and research institutions rivals that of the federal government. We know from NSB, NSF indicators that industry is a very large funder of fundamental research within industry itself. Universities are contributing more and more from their endowment and current gifts to researchers in science buildings on their campuses. So the question is, how can these sectors better align to work together to achieve larger impact in science? And Panch gave a number of examples that NSF is working on. So there are lots of examples of partnership, but what we should aspire to, and VAST is very cognizant of, is innovation in our approach to scale our efforts. We need to do bigger things. I mean, you saw the example of NVIDIA, $30 million. Well, guess how much money NVIDIA has and trillions, and could contribute even larger to these kinds of efforts. So it's a start, and you saw a wonderful map of starts, but our big hope is that government leadership can foster such partnerships on projects at a large scale, and that's going to take innovation in the partnership domain. Second, what's changed is the interplay of basic and applied research. Bush's report emphasized the linear process between an idea and its application, but today it's recognized that the dance between basic and applied research is more closely orchestrated, and basic science does not always lead the dance. There's a tremendous feedback between both basic and use-inspired research. In a 2021 Issues article, Dave Spergel and Bill Press emphasized more complex pathways to innovation. They said, quote, "The meandering path to success sometimes starts with a technological breakthrough and at other times with a fundamental breakthrough. To effectively advance innovation for society, we must support and enable a diverse set of approaches to scientific advancement." A third change are the new fields spun off from discovery, invention, and application, like computer and information science, quantum science, AI, biotechnology. New technology, especially in communications, has sped up the discovery engine worldwide. There's also, of course, the profound influence of the social sciences today in their ability to directly connect with public benefit. Through the decades, NSF has recognized the emergence of new fields and crystallized new directorates around them, most recently TIB. But not everyone everywhere has such a wide embrace or emphasizes the connections between the fields. A fourth difference today is the recognition that talent abounds everywhere. And certainly Ponch, as NSF's leader, talks about that a lot. In Bush's time, there were only a handful of innovation nuclei, the big cities and universities on the East Coast. We recognize that our outreach should extend across geography, across age, across background, to those both at home and abroad. We recognize the need for a whole-of-country approach, raising scientific literacy and science workers in every part of the country, infusing opportunity everywhere. To ensure global leadership, we need to inspire and retain talent. We'll hear more about vast recommendations on geographical investment, retention of talent, and workforce training from Marcia and Monica. And finally, a fifth change, the increasingly siloed nature of science, fostered by its scale and complexity, and by the competitive and focused nature of our scientific institutions. The result is that our policy efforts can lack coordination and can dissipate rather than collect energy. In Vannevar Bush's day, it was clear who would lead. But is it clear today? Is this the ultimate question that Vass asked? So with that, Sudip, should we turn it over to Marcia?
Oh, yes, thanks, France. Just to say that the fundamental premise that you just laid out is exactly the one. And the idea that what got us here to this great place isn't going to get us to there. What got us here isn't going to get us to there. And so I'm going to turn it over to Marcia now to start with some of, again, the tactical recommendations that we're recommending. And then in February, we'll release the full on vision. Marcia, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be meeting today with the National Science Board. And I wish I could be there with you in person, but that's not possible. So thank goodness for Zoom. Any case, France laid out for you all of the major changes that have happened in the more than 75 years since Bush's Science, the Endless Frontier. And the changes in the U.S. science enterprise, in contrast to those large changes in the international science regime, have been modest and incremental. And it's really time to step forward and say, what fundamentally do we need to improve to take advantage of what the strengths are that we have today and to remain competitive internationally? So the VAST task force has identified 3 major areas for action. The first area for action is called Unleashing America's Strengths by Reducing Inefficiencies and Breaking Down Barriers that Hinder Progress. Now, you'll notice what this first vision statement doesn't say is we need to throw more money at this. I mean, of course, researchers would always like to see more money to do more science, but we also felt that unless we can get rid of the inefficiencies in the system and better collaborate across these various operators in the research domain, academia, industry, government, philanthropy, until we can do that, we don't really have a good case for asking for simply more money. The second area for action is empowering the strongest, most adaptable workforce in human history to benefit the American people and sustain our leadership as S&T innovators. I'm not going to say a lot about this because Monica is really going to hammer home the importance of this, but let it just be acknowledged here in this room and more widely that the reason why the U.S. is a science leader is immigration. More than a quarter of all of our Nobel laureates were born overseas, but were naturalized citizens at the time they got the Nobel Prize. And the same is true of the membership of the National Academy of Sciences. 27% of our members were born overseas, were attracted here for the science opportunities, and became American citizens so that they could be elected to the Academy. And then finally, the third of the areas for action is to drive breakthroughs with targeted commitments to critical infrastructure. France mentioned, and you all know cases where it wasn't just a great idea that created a scientific breakthrough, but it was a new piece of technology that gave us new eyes to observe the physical world in ways that we never could before. And it's only through maintaining those investments that we are going to stay at the cutting edge. Now, these 3 areas that I mentioned are all about using the resources we have more efficiently. Number 2, creating a world-leading scientific workforce, because after all, we can't be world-leading if we have the best team. And third, we have to ensure our researchers have access to the best equipment in areas of critical investment. And France already mentioned some of those strategic areas where we are losing ground to the Chinese, and these are very important areas. So one way we can ensure that we are world-class in those areas is by creating the world-class infrastructure, which is going to allow our researchers in those areas to leapfrog other people that don't have the access to the same infrastructure. Now, let me list now the 4 strategic actions that VAST is proposing. The first one I really love because while it sounds fresh, but it actually is just a ramping up of some things we've already been doing. And that first action is to empower local leaders to align American resources through regionally based science and technology economic generators. These are co-created and co-funded by the private sector and all levels of government, as well as philanthropy. And the purpose is to spur efficiencies and create pathways to good paying jobs. Now, I loved the presentation that Punch just gave on these national AI centers. What a beautiful example of government working hand in hand with industry across all regions of the country to try to spur innovation through partnerships between government and industry. And I've said before in other venues that AI is not a topic we want to cede all of the activity to industry. There are whole applications of AI for public good that likely don't have a profit motive in them. And therefore, it's less likely that industry will invest in those applications of AI. In addition, we found in spades with the development of GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, that anytime that industry gets a headlock on a certain technology, public loses trust in it. Because public believes, many members of the public, maybe less so in the US, but certainly so in Europe, they distrust GMOs because they think the only reason they exist is to make profit for the big agribusinesses. And we don't want to fall into that same trap with AI. We want AI to be more open, we want it to be more transparent, and we want it to be seen as operating in the public good. On a more targeted level, I also want to talk about another great NSF program that I feel falls beautifully under this rubric of partnerships between the federal government and local regional incubators of industry. And that is the Advanced Technology Education Program that NSF has been running for a number of years. Back years ago, when I was director of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, we helped Monterey Peninsula College attract to the California coast an advanced technology education center from NSF that was called the MATE program, where the M stood for Marine Advanced Technology Education. And what I loved about the AIT program was the idea that all of these collaborations with two-year community colleges were designed to turn out graduates with a two-year college degree that would earn a salary to support a family of four. And that's an incredible return on investment when you can get a living wage for a family with 2 years of advanced education. And I'll tell you, the marine institutions in the area, Mbari, Moss Landing Marine Labs, Hopkins Marine Station, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, could not zap up the graduates from this program fast enough. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at to do more of, to bring jobs, high-paying jobs, everywhere in the country, not just to the coast, and a few technology incubators like Austin and places like that. The second action that VAST is proposing now is to keep U.S. educated international talent here and proactively recruit top talent from overseas. Monica's going to talk more about that because, of course, that is a linchpin to any future for American research, is to have the best talent. And then finally, two more actions. One action is to optimize tax codes to enhance competitiveness, strengthen national security, and create more good-paying jobs. Now, the NSB and the research community do not have the power to do that. We admit this. We cannot change the tax code. But it would be beneficial to express support from academia, philanthropy, research agencies, et cetera, that this move would be well received, because it's not just creating more or less taxes for industry. It's allowing them to have the capacity to work easily with these other sectors such that everyone benefits. And then finally, the last one is the investment in critical infrastructure. It used to be, when I was a student, that a single university could have a world-class astronomical observatory or a world-class particle accelerator. That's not true anymore. Now, these kinds of investments need to be made at the state level, the national level, the international level. And we have to make sure we are investing wisely in that infrastructure, which is going to keep us at the leading edge of these top critical technologies that are going to be so important for our economic opportunities, for our environmental safety, for health, and for overall quality of life. So I will end there and invite Monica to talk about the all-important education and human talent resource part of it.
Thank you, Marcia. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to tell you more about our vision for training and education. So pretty much we all have come to realize that as a country, we are falling behind and failing to really develop and support one really critical element of American science and technology, which is the people. And essentially across sector, going from really traditional ones like building ships to emerging domain and technology, critical technology, we need hundreds of thousands of people over just the next immediate 5 to 10 years in order to essentially continue the technology and continue to innovate. And right now, we just don't have the people, and we also don't have the policies, and we also do not have the structure to do so. The good news is that we have a sense of urgency, and that most scientists, and I spent the whole year in DC last year, I think within the Beltway 2, there is a very strong sense that this is an existential threat. And so recognizing that one of the main areas of action of VAST is exactly that, to develop and empower the strongest, most resilient, and adaptable workforce in human history. So to do that, as Marcia has mentioned before, we really applied this idea of think nationally and act locally, because we know that at the local level, where Marcia spoke about the science and technology economic generators, those generators are really the most uniquely positioned for success. They have the people, right? They have the talent, they have the institutions, not just of higher education, but also a government, of the government agencies that support that. And they have the resources, the industries, the Chamber of Commerce, the infrastructures. And so it's really at the local level that we can more efficiently and effectively align the ends with means to empower and train the workforce. And as Marcia mentioned, one really critical aspects of success is really the cross integration and collaboration at all levels between industry, academia, higher education, middle schools, philanthropies, industry, because it's only in this context that the appropriate training and education can occur when they're needed today, when they will be needed tomorrow. And also in that way, we can ensure that the people who are doing the work have secure, well-paying jobs, and they're also fulfilling. In a way, we want this movement to build careers that are long-lasting and not just jobs. In terms of our effort at the national level, it's really important that this regional science and technology incubators are really aligned with our national priorities. And that's where the federal government should play a role to guide, to support, to coordinate these efforts. And as we mentioned before, the NSF, along with many other agencies, Department of Commerce for the CHIPS and Science, the DoD, where I worked last year, Department of Labor, they have a lot of really amazing programs that they were started a few years ago, and now they're starting to essentially launch. The second part of this is that we should also make sure, since we need so many people, that we keep the talent that we have paid and spent a lot of time and invested a lot of time in developing. And I am an example of that. I was born in Europe. I came to the US when I was 18 to study science. And I surely, after my PhD, I became an American. I've been an American for longer than I've been Italian. And this is my country. Now, when I train students in my lab, it takes about $500,000 to train one PhD students for 5 years. These are NSF and NIH funds. And why don't we have a return on that investment? So one of the things that we are proposing is to essentially have a very specific and vetted system to essentially promote and invest on green cards for some of the talented students that are coming from other countries, and then we vetted and that they come here. And at the same time, we also want to also be able to recruit talent from other parts of the world, not just when they're students, but when they've already done all the learning and inventing and they have more to do. And so another of the policies we have proposed is to essentially create a strategic recruitment program to attract the top scientists and engineers to this country. And one really great thing that we have going for us beyond the science and technology environment is that our culture is an element of power that most of our countries don't have, especially our competitors. People want to come live here. People love Coca-Cola. People love what we have to offer. And so that is a huge strength that we should leverage. The final thing that we discussed at VAST is something that France mentioned, and is who leads today. And so beyond the role of the federal government in coordinating this local science and technology economic engines, we've also discussed the need for the federal government to really take a much bigger leadership role. And that's because the scope, the scale of the problem, and truly the stakes are existential. And so the way we need to attack this is with unity of purpose and unity of effort. And those are exactly the things that the federal government can do. While we haven't come up with a specific proposal for it, we, during our discussion, and I know many others have, thought of the idea that perhaps this could be shaped like a second iteration of the National Defense Education Act. Whatever form that process or that policy will come, it's clear that we really need a coordinated and coherent focused action to plan, design, and really power and empower the science force of the future. So I'll pass it back to Sudip. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Monica. I'm going to turn it over to the chairman for his thoughts as well. Dario was at the beginning of this effort. You know, I mentioned that we kicked this off at the National Science Board meeting at your last meeting, and part of the impetus for that was the idea that where can we do this effort? Can we do it at the National Science Board? Can we do it at the National Academies? Can we do it at AAAS? And our thought was actually with the urgency and speed and scale that we need to move more quickly, and we need to move as an all-of-nation effort. And so Dario was a real instigator of that. So Dario, let me turn it to you.
I'll keep it very brief so that we have the opportunity to hear and interact with the board members. But the first thing I want to do is just to thank you, Sudip, and Franz, Marcia, like Monica. Andrew is here as well. There's a fantastic team that is working around the clock to make this happen. Part of learning how to partner is to do it. And this is an example, right, of representing the different stakeholders on that. The second is just an observation. Hopefully it comes across that this is not a defensive, I always quote you on this, Sudip, it's not a defensive crouch, it's to look forward, to look at where do we have our strengths as a nation, and what would it take for us to leverage our strengths to do things we could not do alone. And what you've come up, hopefully what you're seeing around this is we have strengths across state and federal government, different agencies. The scale of the operation that now we have as a nation is unprecedented. I mean, we will see before the end of the decade $1 trillion R&D enterprise in the nation. Think about the scale of what is happening. But connecting to one of the things that Franz mentioned, which I completely agree, is we have extraordinary examples of how to do this. But what we need to do is to scale them to a different level. So we got to remember those. I always like to quote the numbers because they're important. So think about $1 trillion. So when we look at partnerships and is in the low number of B's, right? A few billion. It's it's important. It's a big deal. But what would it take for us to do things in the tens of billions, even in the hundreds of billions of partnership for things that we care about? What would it take for us to do that? We don't have an answer that we can say, oh, this is the exercise, this is the mechanism that gets done. But that's the journey ahead. And I think what VAST is doing, what the role that the National Science Board can provide around this in partnership with others. We cannot do it alone. Academies cannot do it alone. AAAs cannot do it alone. But we do have legitimacy, right, in bringing together and bringing the stakeholders together to carry that out. So I think it is with that spirit that we got to carry forward. And I'd like to just open it now to board members to hear comments and provide feedback to all of us. So I see some already raised hands from Juan, Marvi, Vic. So let's go. We have a good lineup. Juan, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Quick question here. I really appreciate these comments and what VAST is doing. I really like the emphasis on workforce development and bring in a broader group. So here's the challenge, or I guess getting at that. I know, Marcia, you've spoken about this in your presidential comments as well at national academies. Given the climate as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion things, how do we make the case for workforce development? We need to bring, and Monica, you were making this one, we need to bring from every place, everybody. We need more of everybody. But that's a challenge now as we see with respect to DEI. And I'd just like to hear you all's comments on that. I have my own thoughts on it, but I would love to hear your comments. And I want to just say, you're right on. We need everybody. We can't just, go with one group. We need everybody in order to be the leader that we are and we keep to aspire to be. So thanks again.
I'll respond quickly, then I'll turn it over to the panel. First of all, good to see you. Absolutely. I think you will find unanimity of purpose amongst an incredibly broad group of ideologies and geographies on this task force in what you said, that we need everybody. Part of this discussion is, remember that VAST is about looking forward. We're tired of the defensive crouch when we become the protagonists of our own story. And some of you are sitting at this table, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, gosh, I knew that. Gosh, NSF's already doing the partnership program. What is it that's new here? The power of it is to put it in one place, to put a vision together. Because remember, the thoughts that are in this room are not all across this beltway. And so my short answer to you is that by providing the vision of what's possible and what can be done for the country, we start a conversation that is a 5-year conversation. I remind everybody that the time between Endless Frontier being written and the NSF being created was 5 years. It was 5 years of political challenge. It was 5 years of discussion. It was 5 years of argument. And frankly, it was 5 years of politics, good old politics. And we have to start that conversation, and a vision provides the impetus for that. Other members of the panel, I'd love to hear you answer that as well.
Yeah,
Franz, go ahead.
Sure. I'll start by saying, Juan, this is something that I and I'm sure everybody here cares passionately about, and we've had things in the past that have been similar. Take climate change and different administrations, that you hold fast to the vision, but sometimes you need to change the language that goes along with the vision. And Julia Phillips and I are in a different group where we're very concerned about this. We hired a post-Scottish decision about admissions and all. We hired a lawyer to help us with our own initiatives, which were in particular Our biggest one was to get more, fund more Black students to become physical scientists. And the recommendation was that we change the language, and they gave us words to, make the changes to de-risk our goal, not to change the goal and not to make it less important, but to avoid others coming down and challenging it on on a linguistic basis, that it didn't meet the Supreme Court's objectives. And so we're doing that. But anyway, that's my take, is hold fast to the vision, but really consider how you talk about it. And we certainly had in my own leadership at NSF, we had examples with climate change where we didn't change a single program, but we changed the way that we talked about it.
And if I can just add 2 seconds to what a really thorough answer from France. When we look at who were not getting represented in science, it's, of course, a lack of diversity in terms of racial background and gender and that sort of thing. But it's also that we're not getting people who are economically disadvantaged and don't get the education they need to pursue science. And I think the difference between just the poor and the underrepresented, we can help by putting up more role models that convince all of those women, young African, Hispanic men, whatever, that they belong in science. So I think an extra effort in role models is going to be really important at this point.
Okay, if I could see the list, I would encourage, there's so many folks that want to have, so I would encourage everybody to keep short questions to maximize the number of topics we can cover. Who was next? Oh, Marvi, you're next, and who's after that? Vic? Okay.
Yeah, so quickly, and hopefully this is a simple question. Our future in science and technology depends on funding, and from a federal government perspective, I'm speaking. And funding in science and tech depends on the perceived importance and perhaps an understanding of how science and technology funding correlates to economic development. Within our population, the perception of value of science and technology is also dependent on our critical thinking skills as a nation, and perhaps how the population trusts or not the scientific community. So in your expert view, what activities, including policies, should we pursue as a nation to develop those critical thinking skills within our population?
It's a great and powerful question. Again, I'll just very quickly say, and then I'll turn it to the panel. There are a couple things. One is education at the K-12 level, and that's a discussion that's happened in VAST quite a bit, and we have representatives from K-12 education on the task force. We haven't talked about those today because they'll be part of the broader set of recommendations. The second is, in terms of building trust, this idea of place-based research also, I believe, builds trust, because when it's in the community, I visited the innovation engine down in North Carolina, which is the grantee is in Morganton, North Carolina, which is 10 miles from my hometown. And that is not a place of elite universities. It is a place of textile mills and furniture factories. And building trust comes from being in those communities at the same time. So I think those two things together, K-12 education for the critical thinking skills, but then also relationship building in communities.
And if I can add just one thing to what Sudip said, it would be that we also have to teach people who to trust. And we have to start that early, because after all, I'm a scientist, but I don't know infectious disease, but I know who to trust when it comes to talking about infectious disease. So I think that has to be another big part of it, is give students resources of where to go for trustworthy information.
Thank you all for a great presentation. This is directed to both Marcia and Monica. Just want to give you some information as part of your 70. I'm sure you have some partners, but out of Ms. Shu's office in the Department of Defense, she just recently put out a report, and I would say engage with them as well as through the board. they fund annually international research at 1.4 billion. And one of the things that they were looking at is when you talk about bringing international talent, we need to talk about talent that we can also leverage through our own talent here in the United States. So they have an initiative kind of called the Congo and Salsa Initiative, where they are now investing over 100 million in Africa, as well as in Latin America. I would say, take a look at that. I could send you the presentation, because now what that does is build a bridge between institutions in the United States where you have broader participation. So institutions like being led by Heather Wilson at UT, as well as institutions where Willie May and myself work at HBCUs, because then this counts Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And so I think the DoD, that is something you got to really work with with them. They are investing that money, and it won't change with the change in administrations. And then one just final comment is I'd like to hear more in further presentations about the investment of U.S. domestic STEM talent. That's extremely important. Didn't hear it today. I'm sure it's not an oversight. France has been a great partner in making that happen, but we've got to build that talent here first, broadly across all sectors. That has to be a priority, okay? If VAST is going to be taken seriously, not only by industry, but by also our partners on the Hill. Thank you.
That was fabulous. One thing I will mention is that I see Africa in the future as what China and India are today. Vast sources of young people who are eager to help their nations and eager to move ahead. And so I think any investments we're making right now in Africa are really good. The Academy has a Frontiers program where we join young African scholars with young US scholars and have them put together joint projects. And DOD, DOE, a lot of government agencies have been very generous in supporting these nascent collaborations.
Yeah, and Africa has some of its own programs that we would be wise to join and support. It's not all about us, planting ourselves there, but also that they have some fabulous, like the new Einstein program, which is a lot of countries belong to, is an example.
And if I can mention something about our own national domestic S&T base, if that didn't come across, is entirely due to my greenness, this being the first time presenting. But I want to say that that's been a really great part of our conversation, and it's a really critical, important one, because we know that a lot of the technologies and different domains such as space and cyber that we have to invest on, and that we have to essentially remain not just competitive, but many would argue dominant. We need research that is at different levels of classifications, and we need collaboration and partnership between the military, academia, industry. And so it's particularly important that we have the national workforce in order to do this research that's really critical, beyond being able to also attract a small number of vetted partners. So absolutely.
But that's also an area in which the research community itself needs to take a serious look as to what we're doing that discourages domestic talent from wanting to go into science. And the example I always give is I have 3 brilliant daughters. Each of them went to a professional program post-college, and in 2 years of education, they were earning 6-figure salaries, whereas all of their friends who went into science programs were still trying to get their PhDs done on starvation wages.
I think I had seen Heather's hand up. I don't know if it's up, and I cannot see the rest of the list. You took it down? Okay. All right. So who has the list? Okay. I think say Heather took it down, Julia then.
Yeah, boy, there are so many things to pursue here. I think one of the things that is going to be critical for success is going to be that engagement across sort of levels within the country. There's the national, and international in certain ways, all the way down to the very local levels. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about what engagement you have at those lower levels, because, for example, in education, you're not going to get anything done unless you engage really at the town level, the school district level, and that's really where the rubber meets the road, and they call the shots. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what the thoughts are in terms of how you're going to do that.
Yeah. Julia, I think that's a brilliant point. It's so important. This country is not, we don't have a centralized education system, as we all know. And there are pluses and minuses to that, many minuses. What I'll say to that is that the task force itself, I want to remind everybody, we can't solve every problem. So I do want to say we're focused on providing a vision for what the country can be and can do that is positive and forward-looking. I will say the task force, if you look at the makeup of it, we were very much at pains to find politicians and leaders at the state and local level. So you'll find the Speaker of the House of West Virginia as a member of the task force. You'll find a state senator from New Jersey as a member of the task force. These are folks who are deeply, I'm not talking about Congress folks, I'm talking about folks inside of state government, right? So they're representing a small number of people. They're deeply connected to their local communities, and they are in states that are very across ideologies. What brings us together, and we disagree probably on many things, what brings us together is our vision of what's possible for the country in science and technology and in education. We can set that vision. We'll have some recommendations. We're not going to be able to solve every problem. So I don't want to present the idea that we're going to fix K-12 education with VAST. I wish we could. But what we can say is that we can present a vision that is over a 5-year period can make a real difference. And then if you can imagine passing something like an NDA 2.0, if you can imagine creating a series of events that create momentum for K-12 education, that's huge. Remember that in 1945, when Vannevar Bush wrote Endless Frontier and the 5 years to NSF, remember that the money didn't come till 1957, right? Remember that there are things that happen, there are catalyzing moments, and the key is to be ready for those moments. And if you haven't presented a vision, if you haven't had a sustained effort on Capitol Hill, which I haven't talked about that here because it's maybe not the appropriate place for it, come talk to me afterward. This is not ending in February, right? This is a sustained effort that requires all the skills and political tools that are available to make policy change in this country.
Thank you. I just want to add one thing, and that is that the states are not monolithic either.
Amen.
And so you've got to get down lower.
Yeah.
And just one connecting on the dots, we're going to have a panel, as you know, in the afternoon, right after our NDA 2.0, entirely focused on the domestic talent investments, what we need to do, which we are connecting obviously with this vision. But we're going to have a full hour devoted to that piece as well. Sorry, I interrupted. I can't remember. Was it Franz? Go ahead.
Oh, I just to Julia's point, and because Wanda Ward is here, I did want to mention that that Wanda took that point very seriously when she started the Includes program. That was very, very local and very specific to the needs of individual communities. So as with many, many things, most things, NSF has been there first. They have great models. We just have to, as Dario keeps reminding us, we need to figure out how, the universe figured out how to inflate itself and become very big very fast. And we need to figure it out too.
Oh, okay. The real list instead of the made up list. Okay, Suresh is next. Scott, let's start with the two.
Thank you, Dario. First of all, thank you very much for all the members of the VAST committee. So for humbled by 70 people working together tirelessly on that. Thank you. One of the things where your vision comes true, any US citizen can be a scientist or inventor. So Amen. It doesn't matter whether they have a PhD or anything. So I really can align behind that vision where you want to go. But one thing you pointed out is about the energy dissipation and energy increase, about coordinating these efforts together. do you have some kind of a new business model or a new model to think about it along that way?
Yeah, and I would say that it's very much built upon some of the models that we've seen through the NSF and through partnerships in New York and in other states, where at the local level, you see industry, academia, community colleges working together to create different pathways into the sciences. It shouldn't be that you have to have been in algebra in 7th grade if you're ever going to be an engineer. Right. If that's the core connection, then we're just not, we're never going to have enough. But if we can have different pathways in and out, and if those are created at the local level based on the needs of that community, it's going to be different in New York than it is from Texas, than it is from Oklahoma. And that's good. That's a great thing for this country. And that's, frankly, it's the only way. At the national level, you can't just, you're not going to be able to know which things are most important. What we can do at the national level is provide those structures and say, can governance models at those local levels be led by the local community, by the university in that area, by the economic development organization in that area, by the 501c3 created by the governor in that area? Can it be led there? And can those funds be commingled so that the federal dollars help add scale, the industry dollars help add scale, the philanthropy dollars help add scale? Those governance models, we have a whole bunch of, I hate the word bespoke, but I'll say that word. We have a whole bunch of custom models all around the country. Can we, at the federal level, create a framework for how to do that so that it is scalable in a way we've never done before?
But Sudip, I'd also say that at a higher level, this is something that we were hoping to discuss with the NSB. And that basically is who really has the authority and the leadership to take a vision like VAST and actually make it happen. And I think that as Sudip says, we can let, of course, 1,000 flowers bloom, but that is probably not going to get us the infrastructure piece, for example. So we'd really like to open up this conversation. It can't be OSTP because OSTP will always be considered political. And so is it the NSB? That's a question we have.
Yeah. Scott, then Ryan and Wanda.
I'll be fast. Thank you to the panel. And coming from a small business, applied engineering, light manufacturing perspective, a lot of what you said was music to my ears. Eliminating snags to being able to build a business by engaging local, state, federal level is huge. And you mentioned taxation also. It's not from a greed level, it's a compliance level. I don't want to go to jail, but man, every year. So eliminating blocks like that is great. But the main issue I wanted to raise has been hit on. And Marcia, you stole my thunder. My 2 kids went the MBA route. What can we do to make a engineering, in my case, or science path more attractive to domestic students? You know, it's wonderful we can grab the talent from around the world, but we have this huge talent base here that we are, in effect, disinclining to take a path into science and engineering.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And during the course of the conversation in VAST, and I'll say that these conversations happen late at night and sometimes with a glass of wine. That's part of the culture we've tried to create on this thing. Is to say that there should be, you shouldn't require a parental safety net to become a graduate student, right? You shouldn't have to have that because most people don't. And so that means employee-like benefits for graduate students. That doesn't mean employee status it means employee-like status for graduate students. It means employment status for postdoctoral students and fellows. And all of that has an effect, right? So when you make those choices, it means grants have to get bigger, which can mean less grants. It can mean more dollars. Those are all priorities that you have to say. If you don't make a priority, if you don't choose something, then nothing gets done. And so you have to choose. And that's the kind of discussion that has to happen at the National Science Board, has to happen at the leadership of the agencies. These are critical questions. And you can always lead and you can sort of get by. But what I've found is if you don't actually choose to make those decisions, those tough decisions, then we're going to keep on with the same size grants and less and less money for graduate students and less money for the actual work of science. And that's not a way to go either.
Yeah.
All right.
And I just want to add that this is a place where philanthropy can really cares about and has already jumped in, but with a little bit more structure. they very much want to help graduate students and emerging scholars. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of money there.
Conscious of time, what I'm going to do is, oh, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I was going to say that beyond the financial part, I think there's also cultural aspects of how we communicate and value science as a society. For example, if we just look at our military, their pay is also way lower than the average worker that it's out of the military doing the same job, but they have benefits. They also have a sense of mission. They have a sense of service. So another way, when they are in the military, they don't get paid through money. They also get paid in different ways. And it's an investment for the country for the future. And I think there's so much about science that it's like service, that we really should build a culture of communication around the point and value the importance not of science, but of scientists and society. And there's many ways to do that in addition to finance. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is Ryan, Wanda, and Heather have raised their hand. Why don't we get your questions all in a row, and then we'll try to best, the panelists to answer that. So Ryan.
Awesome. So competition can be an invigorating thing. I'm really curious to learn what VAST has learned from our competitors, what they do well, the Chinese, the Europeans. Are there any quick wins that we can apply?
Wanda?
Very quickly. Thanks for that excellent panel. One of the things that we've been discussing within the SEP, the Science and Engineering Policy Working Group on Talent Development, is the inseparable consideration of both the need to grow the domestic talent while concurrently fostering open intellectual borders. For example, we have a lot of talent. We don't have sufficient data that have been developed here in the US and go abroad, many returning to their home, but we don't have any data or strategy on how to keep that US developed talent it collaborating and connected to the US STEM enterprise. So I would recommend that VAST consider, when you're talking about talent development, if you would consider talking both at the same time and concurrently, the need to grow greater domestic talent, the missing millions, but also to find out what has happened. We call it brain circulation. We're working closely with SBE on that. So thanks for that, that consideration.
Thank you. And Heather.
I think I'm probably just going to put an asterisk or an exclamation point next to what Wanda just said. The emphasis on retaining talent that's immigrated and developed here in our universities will not resonate with a significant portion of Americans who want to know, why not my kids? Why isn't the opportunity open for my grandkids? And I don't think you want that response. And I don't think that's what you intend. And I completely support the need to relook at H-1B visas and how things like the Staple Act to just attach a green card to a college diploma for a high need field. But we have to first, particularly with American tax dollars, look at how we inspire the next generation of Americans and American kids to participate in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it's not just about money. A lot of it has to do with culture and experiences and all kinds of other things. And there are universities that have showed how to do this and do this well. So I would just give you a little bit of caution on that element. Thank you.
Amen.
So
let me just be really clear. That's exactly the model we're following. So I don't want anybody to feel that that's not the way we're going. You will see that the model that we've seen is if you saw the consensus report out of the National Academies on immigration, which had a heavy emphasis on domestic talent, that's the model. That is the model that we'll be talking about.
And I just wanted to jump in on Heather's comment here. And let me just talk about a really stinky elephant in the room here. When it comes to graduate work in STEM, which is funded on a research grant, I think universities would love to be able to fill their coffer or fill their classes with domestic talent. When you have international people come in, there's just more issues. But for undergraduates pay out-of-state tuition. And that's a problem because a lot of our universities are now depending on that higher tuition rate from foreign students. You don't think so?
No, we disagree, but maybe we can take it offline.
We can take it offline. That's not going to resonate with the public.
No, and I would never bring that up with the public. It's something we have to deal with internally.
So
Okay.
what I'll just mention to Ryan's point about what have we learned from competitors. So our main competitor, and again, I'll refer back to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute paper, which is really a very interesting read, the way they do their data collecting and their indicators and all. And it is Australia, so it isn't, some country who's prominent, very high in all these competitive fields. But what we've learned from the China example, we'll take that one since they dominate in many areas, at least using the main indicator that they have, which is citations and papers. And we know that can be problematic, right? But is that they have just a much different approach to their strategy, very centralized approach, very top down. And our country has chosen to let innovation bloom from wherever and from whomever. And both of those models have strengths, and we are in competition with those two models, okay? So we've learned that probably that some focus is really good. And that's what we're striving for here, is some very focused ideas, especially to land on Congress and some of the big players that I mentioned earlier. So that's one thing we've learned. And the other thing that they have a nice diagram of the brain flow and circulation worldwide. And so thinking very seriously about how that works and what countries are doing to attract brains from all over the world and you heard from Monica, especially a lot of the vast models there is very important. So I would think, so those are the interesting positive things we've learned from competition or competitors. We've also learned how that some technologies, and I think Marcia mentioned this in the GMO example, are very scary. And we might be doing the wrong thing by being afraid of the directions that technology can go. And of course, AI is a prominent example right now that we have to be very measured and careful on using a tool which has great promise, and then be very aware of its threats. And this is where scientists, and there's recent Pew study about whether scientists should or should not be involved in policymaking. I kind of fall on the side of let the experts weigh in. They don't have to direct things, but they have to inform. And so those are some of the things that we've learned from our most prominent competitors.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to thank Franz, Monica, Marcia, and Sudip for this invigorating discussion. The purpose of this is to continue. This is not a finished, but it's continue to engage, get feedback. We are, of course, going to devote on the topic that we spend a fair amount on the Q&A on the domestic talent and a national defense education act 2.0. That's the next panel, which going to bring and continue to advance those core recommendations and ideas, and also to feed and to bring them in here. So we're going to spend a full hour discussing that after the break. And but again, thank you, Sudip, for this effort. This is not an easy task. There's so many different dimensions that we're trying to avoid. But I think the vision that you are articulating in terms of this is not a short-term agenda. This is a long thing. And I think reminding us of what happened even with the creation of NSF and how long it took, right? From the beginning of people exposing ideas until it was created, let alone funded, it was a journey. Let me put it this way. So it's a similar moment, and but I think this is a coalition to catalyze and make that moment happen. So thank you. We're going to take a break here, and when we return, we will have the NDA 2.0 panel. Thank you.
Thank you.